In today's video, I'm going to be talking about my editing process, which might differ from other people's editing processes, but believe it or not, mine goes through about 10 different stages before the reader ever reads it. All right, so the first stage is time, which is more of it has to do with editing, but it's more of good practice just in general. So, you finish a novel or a manuscript and you're really eager to get it out in the world. I think it's a very big mistake to rush it to market, to either post it, like post first drafts, which I see all the time, or they maybe rush to editing and they get it out there. I would advise against this because the ideas are too fresh. When you just finish a manuscript, you have an idea of how it is or how it should be, but only through the separation of time can you really go back and evaluate it with fresh eyes and really see it for what it is. So when I finish a novel, I usually wait. I've waited up to 2 years before I even touch it or even look at it. Many of my books have at least a year, but other ones like the PRODIGY series, books 2 and 3, I kind of rushed those. I finished them and I began editing them and I kind of got them out just because, of the popularity of the first book. I kind of wanted to get those books into market, and I felt maybe delaying that process might kind of allow it to cool off, which I didn't want. So decide for yourself what's a reasonable amount of time. I think a couple of months is sufficient. Put it away, do something else, don't look at it, don't think about it, write something else, focus on other projects, maybe a YouTube channel, and then go back and edit it. Okay, so step 2, I've given some sufficient amount of time and I'm ready to dive into the editing process. The very first thing I do is edit it in Word. This is very similar to how I write the novel, which is just go through it line by line from start to finish and just fix anything from spelling mistakes or maybe there's a large paragraph, I want to break it up into 3 paragraphs, or, delete certain things or move some things around, maybe combine chapters. This is all really helpful to do in Word. That's actually quite a lengthy process and probably one of the more difficult processes because it's really the first look at the document after you wrote it, and it's probably going to be pretty rough. Generally, first draft, I'm just trying to get ideas out, trying to get the structure and the pacing and the flow. There's certain things that don't really fit. Once you kind of step back and you see the whole thing, you know what, this section's kind of boring, or this character wouldn't say that, but when you're just starting, like, the first week in writing, you don't really necessarily know what the character would do or not do. So, they're kind of rough. There's certain things that don't make sense. So this is really what makes editing in Word such a lengthy process, because it's like your first look at it. So when you read your story back, you're not actually reading word for word. Your brain often chunks groups of information because your brain remembers when you wrote that sentence. So it's not reading word for word, it's remembering or recalling what you meant to say. So what happens is you often read a sentence, but you're not actually reading the mistakes, you're reading what it should be. So when you save it as a PDF, it kind of tricks your brain, tricks your eyes into looking at it as brand new for the first time, because the document looks different. The background is more of is a different texture. The font is maybe different. I don't know. There's something about editing in PDF. Maybe the size is different that just tricks your brain into looking at it for the first time. So when I have the document PDF, I'm just going through line by line, reading, and anything, I usually have 2 screens. So anything that comes up, I can just quickly jump over to my Word document and edit it on the fly. So stage 4 is to print off the document and edit like the paper version with a pen and a paper. I just sit in my bed or at my desk or wherever, and I just go through it line by line, and I circle, I make notes. And this is basically the same concept with the PDF. It changes the look of the document. It's something different about it, that you can see things, you can see mistakes and clumsiness, and I don't know, it just looks different. You kind of evaluate it with fresh eyes. And sometimes I do this step before the PDF step. Depends on what I feel like doing, but putting the paper editing stage after the PDF really makes me see all the flaws in it. So it's not as polished as I once thought it was. Okay, so after I get all the edits on the paper, and by the way, it should be a lot. There should be a lot of things crossed out, a lot of circles and arrows and added text. When you read at like in the paper, maybe you read at a different speed. So maybe you skip over. I find that I skip over certain things too quickly. So sometimes when I'm, in my first draft and I'm writing, I'm just trying to get the ideas out and I'm not really spending a lot of time developing the idea. And I say, in the paper stage, I go, you know what, this reads too quickly. This happens too quickly after this happens. And there's not enough time for that idea to really settle and digest and build tension. So I'm actually writing in the margins a lot and really kind of fleshing out the story and making the pacing a little bit more, intensified, if that makes sense. So after I make all these notes and edits, I incorporate them into my Word document and I save it into on my mobile device and I read it from my phone. Again, this is the very same concept with the PDF and like the paper. It's just changing the look of the document. So reading it on your phone, your eye thinks it's a brand new document. You've never seen it before. And anytime that I come across something that like a mistake or, spelling mistake or something that I want to expand on, I just highlight it and I do a screenshot. And at the end of me finishing cover to cover, I'll have, 40 different screenshots that I'll have to go through my phone, and then I'll have the Word document open and I'll make those changes. Okay, so we've done 5 stages of editing. It's getting very, very polished. There's still another 5 more to go. So we had a sufficient amount of time. We edited in Word, we edited in PDF, we edited in paper, we edited on the phone. What could possibly be next? Okay, there's a really cool feature in Word that allows you to read the document to you. And when you read it aloud or you have Word read it to you, you can hear it from a different kind of perspective. Again, it's about putting the information into your brain with a fresh idea, fresh perspective, so you can really sit back and evaluate it. And when you or Word reads it to you, you can see a lot of the clumsiness, the clunkiness. Things are not developed. It doesn't make sense. Dialogue really kind of falls apart and you go, okay, hang on a sec. This isn't really good. I have to fix this. So I'm sitting there and pausing it and then editing it on the fly. And it's a lengthy but necessary process. Okay, so you need Microsoft Word 2016 or greater. And I've opened up a chapter 1 of this short story that I wrote called Oak Ridge. I wrote it a few years ago. Some of you may be familiar with it. So I just go to this review tab and then you can see this read aloud kind of link here, this button here, and you click it and it's going to start reading.
Connor's breath froze in the crisp autumn air as he exhaled. Extending his arm out in front of him with one eye closed, he was attempting to determine how much daylight was.
And so here you can actually change the reading speed and the voice. So if you want to go to a male voice, this is what it sounds like.
By aligning his thumb on the horizon line, he counted how many hand lengths it took to reach the sun. I
prefer to do both. So I put this as stage 6, which is just read aloud, but really it should be 6 and 7. So read aloud, I actually prefer to read it out loud myself. And then a separate step, have Word read it. So at this point, you've read the story 100 times, you're sick of it and you don't want to see it ever again, but you're still not done. So at this point, I hand it off to one of 2 editors. Now, there's 2 different styles of editing. There's basic editing, which is fixing spelling mistakes and grammar and that kind of stuff. And then there's substantive editing, which is where somebody goes through and says, you know what, this doesn't necessarily make sense, or maybe this can be spelled out further, or this character arc isn't compatible with what they do later on. They're really evaluating the story as a whole as somebody who's trying to make the best story possible, whereas a basic editor is just trying to make the best grammatically correct text possible. So it's a little bit different. Now, these editors are generally not free. I mean, I've never had anyone edit my book for free. You do have to pay, which maybe if you're a young student or something like that, you might not have the money. So feel free to skip these steps. But generally, I try to hire my friends who give me a discount because substantive editing can cost thousands of dollars. I usually pay $500 and I'm happy and they're happy and it's win-win. So stage 8 is the kind of editor, external editor, whatever stage you want to call that. I get it back from one editor. I incorporate all the notes. I don't accept everything. Sometimes they say, oh, it should be like this, and I disagree with them, so I cut that out. I then revise the document. I send it to a totally different separate editor who's seeing this for the first time, and I get their feedback and I incorporate it. And now it's getting to that stage where it's ready to be released into the world. But I don't release it to the world just yet. I have one more stage, the final stage. I release all my books on Wattpad for free. I believe I'm Edward Mullen, wattpad.com/Edward Mullen or something like that. It's pretty easy to find me. And so I put out, you know, maybe 3 chapters at a time. And as I put out the chapters, I do one last edit on my phone. I read it on Wattpad, again, changes the document. There's been some time since the last time I've looked at it. So you know, I'm approaching it with somewhat fresh eyes. And then I release it, you know, kind of piecemeal to the world. So in the following, you know, weeks, months, years, whatever, the story hopefully is read by a number of readers around the world. And they actually kind of like the 11th stage of the editing process. They will pick out things that, you know, don't make sense, or spelling mistakes, or things that maybe need further expanding. So you can further refine and polish your document, which is great because if you have an ebook, it's kind of like this living document. You can go back and edit it, update it, and nobody ever has to see the previous version. If you print your books and somebody buys it and reads it, that mistake will forever be in there. Now, I want to say a few things. When you release a book into the world, your skills are eventually going to get better. So within 6 months or a year or 2 years or whatever, as long as you've been practicing, you're going to develop your skills as a writer. When you go back and you read the version that you put out into the world 2 years ago, in some cases, it might be cringeworthy. It might be so bad. You're like, oh my God, I can't have this with my name on it. Can't have it represent me. Even though it went through these like 10 stages of editing, you read it 2 years later and it's atrocious. And I think a part of that is artists tend to be very sensitive and very self-critical. And so when you're evaluating it, you're seeing it for all the flaws, and you know that you could have, had you written it differently, or today it would be written differently. I don't necessarily have a good philosophy on this. There are books, you know, The Art of the Hustle and Prodigy, where I've gone back and I've rewrote them basically line for line. I've changed things around. I've added entire chapters like many years later. And so the people who have read it the first week or whatever it came out, and the people who read it today will actually have a different experience. I did this because Prodigy and Art of the Hustle were, you know, my first books. Art of the Hustle was my first book. Prodigy is my third book. And as I continue to kind of grow my fan base, people are discovering me for the first time. And I don't want them to have, you know, the first impression of me is a subpar book, which may cause them to develop a false perception of my writing ability. They might read something that I wrote in 2010 and think that that is my skill forever. So I felt it was important to kind of go back and revisit those and rewrite them. But every, you know, 6 months to a year, my writing gets much better. So do I go back and continually to kind of polish and rewrite these books? I think not. I think number one, your book should kind of stand as a piece of history that kind of took place at a certain point in time. When you were, say, 25 years old, you wrote this book. When you're 35 or 45 or 55 or whatever, you're going to be completely different kind of viewpoint of the world. You have, you know, richer vocabulary, different perspective. Like Heraclides' quote, you cannot step into the same river twice, because the river is constantly changing, and also you are constantly changing. So the river is a different river and you are a different you. And I feel that, you know, this is true if you go back and edit something or rewrite something that you wrote at 25, you're a completely different person and you're changing that work. And I think in some respect, those should be left alone. And people, hopefully readers, will understand that later works hopefully are written better than previous works. And the second reason, I think it's impossible to make something perfect. You're always going to find something to change. And if you become so obsessed with constantly editing and revisiting and changing things around, then it'll just be a never-ending process until the day you die of re-editing old work. And I feel like your time is better served on producing new work. All right, so there it is. That's my process on editing. Let me know in the comments below if you have other techniques that you like to do, or if you found this helpful. I'd love to know. Thanks for watching the video. If you like it, please hit the like button. If you want to watch more videos where I talk about writing and movie pitches, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time.